Hi, I'm Kyle Kittleson with MedCircle, joined today with double board certified psychiatrist, Dr. Dominic Sportelli. I know this is not your first time watching our videos on YouTube, so why not go ahead and subscribe and give this a thumbs up? When you support this mental health educational channel, it helps us provide content like this for you. So thanks for your support. Dr. Dom, we're talking about delusions and hallucinations, two terms that we've likely all heard before, but there are key differences between them. What are they?
Yeah, so let's pick one. Let's start with hallucinations. So let's give the formal definition. We'll go and dive in from there. Okay, so hallucination is a sensory experience, meaning one of your senses. We have five senses, right? So one of your senses that is experiencing something in the absence of an external stimulus. And I know that sounds crazy, fancy, scientific,
Yes.
but basically it means that any one of your five senses is experiencing something that is not real. It's not there, right? So I'm going to get a little crazy here, and I'm going to say, let's get a little deep and think. Your brain processes all of the information that comes to it by your senses. But if you want to get really wacky neurologically, you say, where do you feel that pain in the tip of your finger? Well, you think you feel it in the tip of your finger, but no, you're feeling it in your brain because that's where it's all processed. And that's how you know that you feel pain.
Wow.
Right? So any one of your five senses can be wrong. They can be wrong. And when there is, and in the majority of us, we live normal, happy, healthy lives, but in certain medical and psychiatric circumstances, this can go a little bit haywire, right? So hallucination. So let's take our five senses and talk about it. So let's talk about hearing. And the reason we'll start there because schizophrenia and psychosis is it's very common to experience what's called auditory hallucinations.
Yeah.
Auditory hallucinations mean that you're hearing something that really isn't there, something that's not making a sound. In the case of schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, or other types of psychosis, it's incredibly common for people to say that they're experiencing voices. They hear voices in their head. But here's the really, really interesting, fascinating part about this is that when I talk to patients that are experiencing auditory hallucinations, they tell me that it's as if I'm talking to them. They hear it as if it's outside of their head. As a matter of fact, I was just in the hospital yesterday, and there was an individual that was experiencing auditory hallucinations. And I said, tell me a little bit about that. What is it like? Is it your own voice? Is it your own thoughts? And he said, no, doc, it's like you're talking to me, but no one's there. So they actually hear an external voice. And this can be broken up further into command hallucinations, which means this voice is telling you to do things, persecutory, which, telling you, obviously you're a bad person, or just, derogatory things. People can hear conversations, meaning two voices at one time. People with mental illness or other medical illnesses can hear commentary as if, they're almost commentating on everything that you're doing.
Right.
So there's various different types of these auditory hallucinations, but in most cases of mental illness, just like schizophrenia, it's usually in the form of voices, as we talked about.
Are the auditory hallucinations, or the voices rather, ever good? I only hear these voices saying bad things. Does anyone ever find themselves getting a voice in their head who says, hey, you're doing a great job. Good. Yeah, hey, look at you go.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've spoken with patients that have voices that are like a friend, right? Or a companion, someone that they talk to, someone that they work out their problems with, someone that, can turn on you, someone that, can go be good one day and bad the next day. The interesting thing about what you just said, though, is that if it's a positive experience, they're probably less likely to present, to a doctor or something, right? Because it's, not considered something negative or frightening. So it might fly under the radar a little bit more. But yes, absolutely. These auditory hallucinations can be just about anything.
Yeah. Okay, so we've covered the auditory, but we have four more senses.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's hit them. So we'll go down that line. Now, auditory was huge because that's what we're mostly going to see in symptoms like psychosis. But we have visual, right? We have our sight, and our sight can go wrong, right? So we have We could see people, we could see animals, we could see objects, we could see colors and shapes that are just, they're not there. Now, this is important because we're talking about hallucinations, the five senses, something is going awry. We can diagnose, or actually our differential diagnosis will be different for different hallucinatory presentations. And what I mean by that is when people have visual hallucinations, when they're seeing something that isn't really there, that makes us think as doctors, okay, wait a second here. Is this neurological? Is this a Lewy body dementia? Is this an eye issue? Is this a substance intoxication? Is this a withdrawal? And the reason I say that is because visual hallucinations are not super common in psychosis. So if someone's saying to you that they're seeing things that aren't there, it sort of expands your differential diagnosis, which is sort of your list of things that, might be causing that. So depending on the presentation, again, it's going to make us think a little bit differently. So those are visual hallucinations. Now, there's something called olfactory hallucinations. And guess what that is? It's smelling things that aren't there, right? So that's one of our senses is smell. So people can smell things that absolutely are not there. Now, is this common in psychosis? Not really. Does it happen? Totally. I've heard it. I've had patients explain to me that they smell things, usually bad things. It's usually associated with a thought or a memory or something in their life, traumatic potentially. However, if someone tells me that they're experiencing olfactory hallucinations, they smell certain things, I have to think about head injuries, traumatic brain injuries, and think about things like pre-seizure syndromes, which is very common. Sometimes people will smell something, believe it or not, commonly the smell of burning rubber or burning plastic before they have a seizure as like an aura, which is super interesting. And in things like Parkinson's disease and diseases like Parkinson's disease, you can also have olfactory hallucinations. So that's the sense of smell, and the sense of smell going awry. The other one is feeling. So we call those tactile hallucinations. And in tactile hallucinations, you feel like things are touching you that are not there. And not super common with psychosis, but again, a huge part of our workup and diagnosis, because when someone's experiencing tactile hallucinations, we think of things like substance abuse withdrawal, right? So very common in alcohol withdrawal, very common in stimulant withdrawal or stimulant intoxication. People feel like bugs are on them to the point that they'll pick at their skin and try to get to the bugs if they're intoxicated with a stimulant. And a lot of withdrawal sequelae will have this tactile sensation where you feel things that really aren't there. Another one is, the last one, right, is taste. And that's called a gustatory hallucination, where you taste things not there, totally not there. Not super common again in psychosis or behavioral health, but this kind of puts us down that line of neurologic differential diagnosis. And again, we're going to start thinking about things like epilepsy, because your smell and taste are very close together. And sometimes if you have an olfactory hallucination, you can also sort of taste something, and that can provide a warning symptom like you're going to have a seizure. So there you go. Those are the 5 types of hallucinations and what you want to think about as a doctor, even a family or a loved one, when someone experiences something like this.
Yeah, really incredible and great examples. Dr. Dom has a series on psychosis that's available for MedCircle members. I'm going to provide an inside look at the end of this video. Let's now then talk about delusions. How are those different than hallucinations?
Yeah, delusions are a little bit trickier, and we'll see why. So when we talk about hallucinations, we're talking about those 5 senses, right? So something goes wrong with your senses. Delusions are concepts and ideas that don't really seem to jive with reality.
I got it. Yep.
Got it. So specifically, if you just look at the formal diagnosis, it's a fixed idea that's not consensually held. And that's where it gets kind of tricky, right? Because we can, as a layperson or just whatever, we can say, hey, that guy's delusional. He's got these political beliefs or these, whatever, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're delusional. So it's a fixed idea that's not, and this is the important thing, consistent with society or culture, right? So that's a very important distinction. And there's sort of 2 criterias with delusion that you want to really look at. People that experience delusion will continue to experience this fixed false belief despite the ability to provide solid contrary evidence, right? Really hard black and white data to say, no, 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 this is the truth, right? And sometimes that can make the delusion worse. They can feel a little bit more entrenched in their delusion if you try and talk them out of it. And again, that second part is that it's not part of somebody's culture. It's not part of ethnic or religious or political beliefs, even though you can certainly get delusional along those spectrums. But if it's a societally held belief, then it's not really considered a delusion.
Okay,
Now,
so then my example that came to mind, and maybe I'll offend some people, wouldn't be the first time, but we have flat earthers.
Mhm.
They believe that the earth is flat. You ask them to provide evidence and they provide their version of evidence. Is that a delusion?
Well, it wouldn't be a delusion because, first of all, it's a group. It's considered a societal norm for their group of people. So they're sort of like bonding with the people that sort of agree with them, number one.
Okay.
And number two, the thing about the flat earth group is that they tend to sort of dismiss or debunk the science behind it because they claim to have their own sort of science behind it. So that would, we're talking gray area here. But when we talk about real delusions and mental illness, I think that might clear up some things and you'll actually see why that's probably not a formal delusion in the sense of a mental illness. So, when someone is experiencing psychosis, let's just use schizophrenia, a lot of times the hallucinations and the delusions, they coincide. They sort of together in the individual's presentation. So when we're talking about delusions, there's various different types of delusions that really seem to be consistent with mental illness like schizophrenia or psychosis. And one is what we call persecutory or paranoid delusions. And, they have this real significant fixed belief that something is out to harm them or make their life challenging, or there's a conspiracy against them in such a strong way that it's affecting their life in a negative way, right? So, let's just, a persecutory paranoid delusion. I had a patient a few days ago at the hospital that believed that he had to go to court and there was this judgment against him and that they were looking for him and the police were right around the corner and he was looking around, peering outside of his hospital room, when in fact there was nothing in reality that had anything to do with this. But he had this fixed belief, this paranoia and persecutory delusion, and very, very specific as well, that this was this whole plan against him. And he believed it, and he believed it as real as I'm sitting here. So another one would be what's called erotomanic delusions. Erotomanic delusions are actually pretty common. And what comes to mind is I have a patient that I see on a regular basis that experiences erotomanic delusions. And erotomanic delusions have to do with thinking that there's a famous individual or a celebrity that you're in love with or that loves you. It has to do with love and infatuation and relationships and romance and jealousy, but so significant that usually on the bizarre side, could it be true? Maybe, but more so on the bizarre side. So I'll give you a perfect example of this. This one particular patient of mine believes that there's a love triangle going on between themselves, someone like Madonna, and then there's a country music star, that there's a love triangle happening and Madonna is actually sabotaging the whole thing. So if you talk about it with this individual, she becomes very angry at Madonna because she's sabotaging this love triangle. And it's so incredibly deep and fixated. Now to add to that, Jim Morrison talks to her as a hallucination and gives her advice with this erotomanic delusion. So here you have a perfect example of a delusion, which is the fixed false belief, but you also have hallucinatory phenomenon kind of coming into the mix as well. And that's something like a schizophrenia or schizophrenic type presentation. So that's a good example of erotomanic, right? If we're trying to describe it. Another one is called grandiose. Grandiose delusions mean the person thinks that they have some kind of superpower. And, grandiosity is used in terms like narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder. And even if you're manic, right, you can be grandiose. But we're talking about, fixed delusions of grandiosity.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're really getting into the realm of, like I'm God. Really believe that you're God, and really believe that you may have some sort of superpowers. You could believe that you could fly. You could believe that you could read minds. You could believe that you're here to solve the problems of the world, but really, really, truly believe that strongly and in a very fixated way. So that's what's called grandiose delusions. There are somatic delusions as well. Somatic delusions mean that you believe that there's something wrong with your body. And I often have patients that will tell me some very disturbing things about somatic delusions, such as my insides are dead, they're necrotic, my intestines are dead, they don't exist, or I don't have lungs, or, something like that, but it's a belief. It's a true belief. And that's a somatic delusion. I had a patient that believed that he was physically dead. And I mean, that borderlines nihilistic delusion and somatic delusion, but he felt that his physical body was dead. And he verbalized that to me. He said, I'm already dead physically. So that's a somatic delusion.
Do these delusions and hallucinations, are they consistent, or can they appear for a short period of time and then go away?
So delusions, for the most part, are usually pretty fixed, and they're hard to shake, even with medications. Sometimes you can reduce the amount of distress that they cause, but delusions are pretty consistent, unfortunately. Hallucinations, you can tamp down with some medications, and they can kind of come and go and exacerbate. And even delusions can kind of range in intensity at times. But also, don't forget, it depends what we're talking about. Are we talking about schizophrenia? Mm-hmm. Are we talking about a manic episode with delusions? Mm-hmm. Are we talking about a delusional disorder? Right? So there's various different, and remember, these are symptoms. This isn't the disease itself. These are just symptoms. So depending on the actual pathology is really how it's going to sort of, look over the course of time. Just real quick though, there's one more, and it's called ideas of reference. Ideas of reference delusions mean that you believe that it's usually the radio or the television set, but you believe that they're talking about you, that ideas of reference, you being that frame of reference, that everything is about you. Mm-hmm. So if you hear a newscaster giving the weather report, you somehow believe that he's saying that because he's talking about me, he's trying to get into my head, he's saying that the weather is my fault or whatever it may be, right? But ideas of reference mean that all these external things you feel are about you. Mm-hmm. And again, too, very much like hallucinations, delusions can sort of guide you down certain differential diagnoses. Like, for example, when people have dementia, they tend to have more paranoid and persecutory type delusions, feeling, when people have dementia, for example, a very common one is that their spouse is cheating on them, or someone is breaking into their home, or someone is stealing their things, right? That's a very common thing in dementia. Mm-hmm. But remember this, as we talked about before, I want to make sure that people know that hallucinations and delusions, for that matter, can be from epilepsy, from Parkinson's disease, from various dementias, things like brain tumors, all types of medical things that need to be worked out and sort of crossed off that differential list before you even get to a formal mental illness.
Yeah. Dr. Dom, this has been wonderful per the usual. I'm looking forward to seeing you tonight and the rest of our MedCircle members for our live panel. Use the links below to register, and we will go into that inside look into your series on psychosis. Thanks for being here, Dr. Dom.
Do you know that someone can become so depressed that they actually experience psychosis? Wow. The psychosis from schizophrenia, or the psychosis from a major depressive disorder, kind of looks different after a while, if you've seen this enough. And here's my point. I've seen people that are so depressed that their delusions are what's called mood-congruent delusions, right? So the delusion in a very depressed person is, I'm causing the end of the world. Like, there is no person out there that is lovable. Everyone hates me for real. And I'm the reason that all of this bad stuff is happening on the news, right? This is delusional thinking. It's not real. Mm-hmm. But you see how it's mood congruent? Mm-hmm. It's dark and it's depressive.
Always great to be here, Kyle.
Remember, whatever you're going through, you got this.